Namaskar everyone and welcome to Desi Talk. We are starting our new series today, and this series is something that is new for us. So I am excited to learn a lot. I am very open to whatever knowledge I can get. Let me add Yashu. All right, so for those of you who are tapping in right now, our series today is on disability awareness. I'm wondering if this isn't working for Yashu. Aha, here she is. Yay, okay. See if she can join. Hey Yashu, is it working? Okay, let me accept instead. We're having some technical difficulties, it seems. All right, Yashu, it's not working. You want me to try again?
Hey,
Hey, there it is.
I think we made it work.
All right. Hey.
Hey.
Namaskar, everyone, and welcome to Desi Talk. I am your host, the managing editor at India Currents, Srishti Prabha, and with me we have.
What's up, everyone? It's your girl, Happy Yashu, here with you all for Desi Talk, coming to you guys live every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, and 9 p.m. Eastern. Okay, we cover all bases here, coming to you guys with very interesting conversations all about the Desi diaspora.
Woohoo! Yeah, and as I was mentioning before, for people who had just joined, this month's topic, or it's been going like a little bit longer than a month now, but we will be talking about disability awareness and living with disabilities in the South Asian community. And so today we have somebody who can inform us a lot more on one specific topic. And I think for everybody watching, just please be sensitive and do not leave any comments that could be hurtful or, just in general, be nice and kind in the comments. But if you have questions, definitely leave them. What do you think, Yashu?
Absolutely. We are talking about a very, very important topic this whole month. And we want this to be an educational space for everyone to be able to have these dialogues in a healthy way. And we really want to bring awareness, which I think you had mentioned, Srishti, which is the most important thing. We here at Desi Talk are bringing all of these valuable conversations to you guys with one purpose and one purpose, which is to educate and to be able to have these conversations. So I'm very excited for this whole concept, for this whole theme this month. And I'm so excited for the guest speakers that we've got lined up who have taken the time and the courage to come through and talk to us about their stories, their
Yes.
journey, their purpose, their dialogue. Okay. So I want everyone to, of course, tap in the comments, show some love, drop your questions. Again, this is an educational platform. So be sure to engage with us, but also be mindful that we are talking about sensitive topics.
Yeah, and I think it's really important what you mentioned is that all the people we interview take a bold step to come and speak with us, but this in and of itself is like one step more than that because people are having to share their insecurities and their vulnerabilities and things that you don't normally want to expose on a public platform. So we're really lucky that there's people and educators like the person today who will be educating us on a topic that we actually don't know very much about. So with that, I'm going to introduce our interviewee for today. Her name is Sripathy. She is a photographer, writer, and artist who works full-time in tech. She was diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease in 2015. She is a co-founder of the Women's Parkinson's Project and an ambassador for the Davis Phinney Foundation. and a Davis Finney YOPD council member. I'm not sure what that means, but I'm sure she'll tell us. And so with that, let me bring Sree onto our live. Let's see.
And for those of you who are tapping in, thank you again so much for being here with us. Be sure to engage with us. If you like the content that we're producing, be sure to check us out at india.currents. Hi.
Hey!
I was in the middle of eating a banana.
Well,
I
I'm
was
glad
like,
you still
I'm
showed
so
up.
hungry. I'm like, oh my God, the introduction is great. But I'm like, when will they intro me? Because I need to eat food.
Aww. We're
Oh,
sorry we
no.
got in the way of your banana, but hey, we like to bring food and drink onto this platform. We
Oh
like to
yeah.
engage and enjoy ourselves here. So feel free to enjoy your banana as we continue this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Sree.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yes,
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
yeah, thank you for coming. I know making the time is not super easy, but you're here, and so I would love to hear more about, well, maybe it's best to start with what Parkinson's is for people who don't know. I know that's a very generic question and it is a Googleable question, but I mean, people are coming in from random areas. So why don't you just brief us on what that means?
So, first of all, I'm Indian and I'm not a doctor. So just to make sure everyone knows that, hashtag not a doctor. So this
That's
is
all
not
of us.
by any
Oh, wait,
means like
yes,
anything.
you is.
Yeah, anything that I say is not meant to replace medical advice or speaking to an actual neurologist or a nurse practitioner or a professional. So just want to make sure people know that. But Parkinson's disease is a neurodegenerative incurable brain disease. And essentially it affects movement, but it affects emotion. It affects a lot of different things. So there's movements that it affects. There's also psychological symptoms or psychological things that it affects as well. And it basically starts with the lack of dopamine, which is what basically allows our bodies to move. So to walk, to talk, to swallow, to blink, to create saliva, for example, all those things. And that when you lack the dopamine, that movement ability to move is taken away. The other thing that is also affected by dopamine is ADHD. So ADHD is also similar in the sense that it's due to a lack of dopamine. I mean, that's just the basic example, but Parkinson's
Mm-hmm.
is essentially, in a very simple way, due to a lack of dopamine. It's much more complex than that, but yeah.
Of course.
I did not know
So
that.
I didn't know that
Well,
either.
dopamine is like everyone's happy, and I'm just thinking, why does everyone talk about dopamine and happiness? I want dopamine to be able to brush my teeth or to eat Godiva chocolate. Godiva, preferably. Godiva.
So are you like, what do you mean? Are you not able to have Godiva chocolate, or are there limitations with what you
Oh, no,
can
no. Godiva
have?
is basically
Oh,
for the United States. So if anybody listens to this from Canada, I need truffles, specific kinds of truffles. And I'm happy
all
to
right.
accept them year round.
This is a PSA. Give her
PSA,
chocolate.
exactly.
So, I mean, one of our questions was, of course, like, what like living with Parkinson's in the South Asian community is like. So if you once you were diagnosed, did you find people reacting to you differently, or did you find even prior to diagnosis that there was any sort of difference in the way people perceived people with disabilities?
That's a very complex question, and I think, and I'm also speaking very generally, and there are going to be exceptions. But disability is something I've been familiar with in the South Asian community, in the Indian community, in the San Jose, San Francisco Bay Area, because we've had friends and family members that have had disabilities, whether it's multiple sclerosis or another family friend with Parkinson's disease or
Mm-hmm.
other things. But it's also something that's not common in terms of Indian people, South Asian people, brown people talking about it and relaying their own experiences. And that's true for non-brown people as well, depending on where you're from. Like if you're from LA or New York, it seems that depending on the region you're from, there's a lot of people that are very comfortable talking about that sort of stuff. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
big generalization. But if you're like from Midtown America, you're not going to be as comfortable talking about it. Once again, generalizations. But so every time I hear that, oh, it's a South Asian thing, I'm thinking it's a human thing. nobody likes to talk about their disease. Nobody likes to talk about their illness or their vulnerability. Nobody, whether you're from LA, New York, Nebraska, India, you don't. You know, you want to be strong and powerful like you were when you were 5, getting all the toys that you wanted, and then having to realize that you're aging at a rate quicker than maybe you've expected, whether it's due to Parkinson's disease or something else, is not a comfortable feeling. Right? So nobody noticed anything, obviously. Like I didn't have obvious symptoms when I first got diagnosed. My symptoms were very subtle. So I was actually very lucky that I got diagnosed as quickly as I did. But I also believe part of that is being very much tuned to my body and kind of pushing my doctor. I didn't have to push her much. She was amazing. She still is. The diagnosis, the specialist that I needed to see. But it's actually when I came out publicly on Facebook, it wasn't a public post, it was a private post. I think the comments I got were all great, but my parents, and I love them very much, were very taken aback that I would share something like that. And I was surprised, honestly, at that reaction, you know, and I had to explain to them that I'm not sharing this to get sympathy or empathy. That's the last thing I want. I mean, like, do I want someone to cook for me every day and get me orange juice? Yes. But that's just because they should do that because they love me, not because I'm not capable of doing it myself. I really don't want help or assistance from anybody. I want to be able to do it all on my own. But part of that, so coming out and relaying the fact that I have this disease and being very public about it with all the advocacy that I'm doing, was to really raise the awareness of South Asians with disease, Indians with disease, brown people with disease, and to make it, to be a voice for people who may not be comfortable speaking about it, because there are many people who are never going to speak about it. But they need to see people who are like them, because I wanted to see someone like me. I mean, I'm sad to see someone like me, but I wanted to see someone like me because I didn't. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'll be that person. And coming from a very private background where I'd be the girl who'd hide from wedding photos, like there's a family wedding, like my own sister's wedding. I'm like, do I have to be in the group photo? Can I just stay all the way in the back? You know, to now posting my photo online, coming on webinars. It's a whole shift for me, and you know, it takes some getting used to, but I'm enjoying the process as hard as it is of being an advocate. Does that answer your question? I know it's a bit long-winded, sorry.
No, it definitely answers a lot of elements of my question, and I know that Yashu had a rather related question to what you were talking about.
So for all of our viewers, you know, we had kind of mentioned in the bio, you know, all the different artistic projects that you're involved in, all of the different works that you do, and we'll kind of get into that in just a bit. But how has Parkinson's kind of affected your lifestyle, working as an artist, doing all of the things that you do? Has it even affected it? Just kind of want to hear about that.
So we'll speak just as a person first. So I was in a high stressful tech job first. And in the end, I decided after that job ended not to pursue something that was that high stress at that same level, at a director level, because it was just negatively affecting my body. I mean, working 60 hours a week is not something that I want to do again in that realm. And I thought, if I'm going to work 60 hours a week or 70 hours a week, it's going to be doing work that I want to do. Right. And so when that job ended, it was during COVID 2021. And I thought, this is great. I'm going to be a full-time artist. I'm going to be a full-time writer. I'm going to win a Pulitzer.
I remember.
It's going to happen overnight, right? It's just going to happen. And what I realized is that wasn't actually a good idea for my brain. I have ADHD type symptoms as well. And so for me, what works really well for my brain, for me, is structure. So having a full-time job allowed me to have structure. Having a full-time job allowed me to organize my day. And I think for many people, whatever their condition is, if they're neurodiverse or not neurodiverse, having structure really matters. If anybody out there has kids, and I don't, but from my nieces and nephews and friends with kids, you know that having kids wake up at the same time, eating at the same time, even as an adult, is really healthy and helpful to your life in many ways. So once I actually got the full-time job, oddly enough, the creativity started kicking in. That's when I was able to start and co-found the Women's Parkinson's Project. That's when I became a Davis Finney ambassador. Before that, I would just wake up every morning thinking, I don't know what to do. Should I eat? Should I watch Netflix? Should I watch Never Have I Ever Again? I don't really know. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But in the way
Yeah.
it's my ability to be an artist, it's made, or even a worker person, it's definitely difficult. I get tired a lot more. I have side effects from medication. I have symptoms that I have to deal with. My dexterity is definitely not there. So in terms of something very specific to South Asian people, or at least people who wear saris, I used to really pride myself on being able to tie a sari really well, at least for the first 2 hours. Hour 3, you don't really know what's going to happen. I'm like, Auntie, help me. Now it's more like hour 20, hour like -1, I need help, or I need help putting it on. I need help with the pleats. So that is something that I found to be very difficult for me to accept. And also thinking, am I never going to be able to tie a sari by myself again? And then I thought, oh my God, am I going to have to buy those pre-pleated saris? That is like sacrilegious.
Hey, I'm already buying those. Are you shaming
I know,
me?
Srishti, I said that deliberately at you.
I can't. So talking about like fine motor skills, like I know you're also a really good photographer, and I want to mention that because when you see the Desi Talk picture of me, it's actually shot by Sree, which is really, really cool. It's the only time I've had any photographer take a photo of me like that.
Well,
So
you're
it's really
natural.
cool.
You looked gorgeous. So actually, photography, it's actually easier for me to use bigger like cameras because they have buttons, they have levers. It's easy for me. Using the iPhone as a photo camera is very hard because everything is squinched together. And when my fingers start to shake, they're not shaking now, but if they start to shake like this, or if they get stiff, or sometimes we do these repeated tapping motions, we just start tapping. So I have to like make sure all my photos are gone. Anything racy, delete from the phone. God knows who I might send that to by mistake. True story, not my true story, but that is.
Oh no, we lost her.
All these little things become really difficult.
That's a really
so like,
this is interesting.
Yeah.
We lost you. Can you repeat yourself? You were saying somebody whose racy photos got sent out. Oh no. Sree, do you have a better internet spot in your house? If you can hear me.
So quick question, Srishti, just for my clarity. So the low dopamine levels, but they make they make your mobility less. So then how come there's like repetitive tapping and stuff? Wouldn't that be like hyperactive behavior?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm thinking that it might just be a random dopamine responses and not to like normal triggers. Cause if she's saying from what I know about dopamine, it isn't like a dopamine is a response to happiness and things like that. I didn't know it as like a fine motor skill related
Right.
chemical, but yeah, it sounds like if you're tapping a lot, that's like hyper. Yeah, like you said, it's like a hyper.
Right. And even like ADHD, that was my understanding because ADHD is hyperactivity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I'm thinking like your mind is like hyperly active, if that makes sense, your attention.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why I was like, interesting.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Did it work? Are you back? Yay!
Yay!
Okay, I was like, well, maybe we lost her forever.
No, I know. The internet connection is pretty good, but, glitch nation.
Okay, so you can complete your story if you want. So someone had a racy photo sent?
Well, no, it's for example, it's not even a racy photo. You can start texting things. You know how you have those funny texts that happen? And then you start texting and you're accidentally like, oh crap, I said the F word or the whatever word to my mom or whatever. And it's like, no, autocorrect. I didn't mean to do that. So sometimes this little tapping thing happens. There's a lot of things kind of like you have to be, I think, a little bit careful within technology in general. And with Parkinson's and me being in tech, I have to be particularly careful. Like when I email clients, I'm like, whoops, didn't mean to say that word. Delete.
I think Yashu had a really good question about the hyper taps. Do you want to ask your question, Yashu? She asked me. I don't know
Yeah.
the answer.
Right. So just because I just want to kind of understand. So I know you had said how there's a decline in like the dopamine, which affects your body and it makes your mobility kind of less. So then why is there this hyperactivity of like tapping a lot and things like that? Or like, how is this in like, just trying to understand if it's supposed to slow you down, why are we seeing this like, you know, this hyperactivity basically?
Complex question. So once again, hashtag not a doctor. Just kidding. Part of it could be due to side effects from medication. If you are taking certain medications, you have something called dyskinesia. So if anybody is familiar with Michael J. Fox, he starts moving around and jerking his body in many ways. And that is not a symptom of Parkinson's disease. That is a side effect of medication, generally speaking. So what the medication does is it gives you the ability to move. But the thing is, we don't have the ability to regulate how much movement we get. So the brain is amazing. The brain automatically knows naturally, move this much to move your arm here to there or up to below, up high. The brain knows that just by the nature of it being the way it is. When you start taking medication to help you do that, sometimes you get too much, sometimes you get too little, and then you start moving around or you don't move at all. It really depends. You have no ability to control it. And the best thing you can do is honestly take your medication at the same time every day. Make sure you're hydrated, all of those lovely things that are good for anybody to do.
Right.
Tapping, we also have like involuntary movements. Why that happens, it's not very clear to me. And when I've asked my doctor, they've explained it a little bit, but I mean, there's a lot of things that aren't very clear about Parkinson's. It's a very complex disease.
Sure.
Wow.
So my next question for you is a little bit, obviously you don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but it's a little bit more personal. So
yes, Srishti, I've gained weight. Thank you.
I love everything. You look amazing. You always look beautiful. And she always says, oh my God, I don't look so good. You know, the shaved head is an amazing look, by the way.
By the way, I just have to make one comment about the shaved head. So for people who might watch this in the future, I've gotten questions if I have another type of disease that has caused me to shave my hair. No, I have shaved it because I've chosen to shave it. And for the people who are familiar with Parkinson's, I have not had brain surgery. So no, I haven't shaved my head because of that either. So just wanted to get that out of the way. But go ahead. Yes.
It's a stylistic choice. A stylistic choice. Okay.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, how were they able to diagnose you? Because you said it was kind of, you know, really lucky that they were able to do that so early in the process. How were they able to figure that out? And the second part to that question is how you felt when you were diagnosed. And I know that's like kind of a tricky question to answer, or like might be traumatic, so you don't have to, but
no, it's totally fine.
Okay.
So I actually had really great doctors. So I knew something was wrong in my 20s, and I got diagnosed at 40. So about 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. So I knew something was off in my 20s, and I started researching things, but I never imagined it would be Parkinson's disease. Like I didn't even really know what that was. We still have a family friend who has Parkinson's disease. And all I knew about it at the time was he had a tremor and maybe couldn't move very well. That's about it. But I started noticing some symptoms when I never related to that in my 20s. And I thought, oh, there's some gut issues, there's sleep issues, there's constant fatigue, all of that stuff. But when I started really noticing issues is when I was not able to really use my left arm. I thought it was a back issue, a back injury issue. Like I picked up something heavy and I twisted my back. And in the end, I went to get checked by my primary care physician. She referred me to a neurologist. And the neurologist did some checks and said, okay, well, you have a carpal tunnel, which is totally fine. You know, that's a very valid thing because I do or thought I did have carpal tunnel. I've had that for many years. But then I looked at the report, and I think it's really important when you get reports from your doctor to really ask questions and review that, not to say, oh, thanks for letting me know this is my diagnosis. I mean, not that anybody would ever say that, but, you know. So I looked it over and I noticed, okay, they mentioned that I have issues with these two fingers, but not these two fingers, essentially. And I said, the report doesn't address the other two fingers. So my doctor listened to me, no question. She referred me to another neurologist. And that neurologist diagnosed me. Essentially, he said, first, there's something wrong, happening with your brain. And I thought, okay, cool. Literally, I thought, cool. I mean, I had no problem. I wasn't stressed. I didn't cry. It just didn't really register. I'm like, oh, there's something wrong with my brain. Okay, he'll figure it out and everything will be okay. And then when he finally diagnosed me, I'm like, oh, cool. Like, it didn't really sink in. So about 2 to 3 days.
So he was able to diagnose you with Parkinson's? The second doctor?
The neurologist was able to diagnose me with Parkinson's. So basically what he noticed is he did something we called a clinical test, which means there's no blood test, there's no not gene test, there's no blood test that tells you that you have Parkinson's disease. So you have to do a bunch of tests. They do a family history. They ask you all these questions. They make you walk back and forth, hold out your hands like this, a lot of different things. And then they take maybe a CT scan, maybe an MRI, and rule out a whole bunch of other conditions. So basically you're diagnosed through this kind of clinical test, in-office test, and by ruling out everything else and getting your family history. So when he noticed that my left arm wasn't swinging, we started going through the process. And so he diagnosed me that first time. And I'm like, okay, well, I want to get a second opinion. So I got a second opinion, and then they did, and this is after I'd already had brain scans. So I got a second opinion by a neurologist who's a movement disorder specialist. So people who treat Parkinson's and other movement disorders are neurologists, but they also have several years in advance of fellowship training to become movement disorder specialists. So I went to movement disorder specialist, and she also diagnosed me. And then I got a third opinion, separate from the 2 doctors that I got, completely separate network. And she diagnosed me also with Parkinson's. So I had 3 opinions, multiple brain scans, multiple clinical visits, in-office visits to test it out. Yeah.
And did you ask to see all the 3 different opinions, or?
No, I asked.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't. But the one thing I've learned is I really need to be my own advocate, because nobody else can be your own advocate for you, right? And some people don't have the ability to be their own advocate due to the nature of their disease. So they really need somebody there that's a care partner, a relative, a friend, to do that for them. And it's exhausting. But if you have the ability to be your own advocate for as long as you have, that is something I would encourage. It's not always possible. Some countries, it's difficult to do that. A lot of women have reported that they have been dismissed by their doctor. Like, the doctors don't listen to them. The doctors don't believe them. Multiple women have reported that. And it's really unfortunate. So, the stories we're told show that the men don't have that same issue, but women do consistently. And so when I listen to these stories, I realize I'm very lucky that I never had that issue. My doctors listened to me. They believed me. I had no problem getting diagnosed. But other friends of mine and other people I know, it took them maybe 10 years, 7 years, 2 years. Yeah, a long time.
Wow.
Well, I think also, like, the fact that you looked at your initial report and you said, oh, this isn't checking for the other things that are an issue. I don't think I would have done that, to be totally honest. I would have just taken their word for it. So, I mean, you were in your 20s when you checked, or it was in your 30s?
No, I got diagnosed when I was 40. So the testing started when I was 40, but I noticed something was off in my 20s. And then I noticed some other symptoms in my 30s, but these are very subtle symptoms. Like, if you just notice, and these are more like what we call prodromal symptoms, or symptoms that are precursors to the actual lack of movement. Oftentimes it could be a lack of smell. So you're not able to smell anymore. I can still smell. So if I walk down the street and anybody sees me sniffing my armpit, that's just me checking that I can still smell. That's really all that is. I'm very happy with that. But no, I have several friends who are not able to smell anymore. There's other things, like you start sleeping well. You might have, I don't know what the word for it, lashing out in your sleep. You're lying down, fast asleep. You have nightmares, very vivid dreams. And I see my friend Ami is here, so just hi, Ami. Wanted to say hi to her. But you start having night sweats, night terrors. It's actually horrible, horrible brain terrors that you have, that people oftentimes have trouble getting out of. So these are all considered to be early signs of Parkinson's disease, but not everyone has it. The thing about Parkinson's is it's different for every single person. So I might have similar symptoms to somebody else, but I also have a lot of different symptoms. So when I'm talking to my friends, like one thing I have, and cut me off, please ask me questions if I'm going on too long. So one thing I have is sporadic dermatitis. So that's one of the things I notice as an early symptom, which means people might call it dandruff, but it's dead skin throughout your whole body. And one basic way to view that, and this is not a medical explanation at all, this is just one way to view that, is our cells turn over. So our skin cells turn over, right? When you have a lack of dopamine, this is the way I'm looking at it, right? This is not a medical description. Cell turnover is slower. Your skin does not shed as much. So then every morning I have to stare in the mirror and scrape off the dead skin from my face, from my body. Not so much from my body, mostly my face. And it kind of burns in it. It's not the most fun process, but it's kind of exciting to see dead skin just kind of flow down the drain. Sorry, that's a little creepy.
No, whatever makes you feel better.
Whatever
I think,
makes me feel happy. But also that's one of the reasons recently I've been shaving my hair, because it just itches, it gets dry. It's easier to deal with when there's no hair there. And then I regret it, and I'm just thinking, oh, I'd love to have long hair again, but then I also have hair loss. So I'm like, it's this back and forth. But yeah, you have many early symptoms. But usually when people are actually diagnosed with Parkinson's is when you have an obvious movement disorder. So you're either having a balance issue, your left arm or your right arm starts swinging, you start losing your ability to walk, meaning you freeze in the middle of a street, you freeze. So you're walking and suddenly you stop. It could be in the middle of a road, it could be anywhere. You're just not able to move. So you're almost literally frozen. And the way to get out of that, because the brain is such a weird thing, is have somebody stick their leg in front of you and all of a sudden you can walk again. Or you can have somebody, for example, be frozen walking in a straight line. They start shuffling, they have no movement, but if they walk up and down a staircase, they can literally skip down a staircase. So Parkinson's is really interesting that way. And it's not that I haven't, like, if I'm not able to move, or anybody with Parkinson's in general, right? I'm speaking once again generally. I'm not talking about comorbidity or other issues they might have. But if it's purely Parkinson's, a lot of times I think, oh my God, my arm is broken, my arm is not working. But it's really not that. It's the brain sending a signal to my arm saying, do not move. So if I get my brain to send a signal to my arm, then it starts to move, right? So I can start talking to my arm and say, let's move. But it's the same thing, like you're a Kathak dancer, right? And I think, Yashu, you've also done some dance or something like that. So when you think about dance, and even Bharatanatyam, right? And if you're doing your arm like this, so this my hand knows how to do. But if I do it with my left hand, I think I'm doing the same thing. My brain thinks I'm doing the same thing, but I'm not. So I have to physically tell my arm to move further out. And it still doesn't look right. So then when I look in the mirror, I'm like, but it feels like I'm doing it right. But I'm not actually doing it right. So I have to retrain my brain to send signals to my arm to do it. And it works sometimes it doesn't. So a lot of it is retraining. That's not a cure. That's not going to help long-term in one sense. I mean, that's a bit more complicated. But basically, you need to retrain your brain and how it interacts with your body as another way to combat the deterioration. Does that make sense? I kind of jumbled up.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting. I had no idea. Like, for me, I'm one of those people who had zero knowledge of, like, what Parkinson's really is. And I think this is wow, that's so interesting. So it's almost kind of like a signal disconnect, if that makes sense.
Kind of, yeah, because, dopamine is a neurotransmitter. So, and that's also the reason people with Parkinson's have a lot of other types of issues. So for women, particularly with Parkinson's disease, we have a higher rate of depression, a higher rate of suicide, a higher rate of negative body dysmorphic feelings, all that stuff. A lot of that they think has to do with the lack of dopamine, because if dopamine makes you happy and excited about life, then you also have the lack of dopamine, which causes you to have these emotions more negative. That's one theory.
Does taking dopamine supplements assist in the process in any way?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Does taking dopamine, like supplements or something, like, is that, like, would that help in any way? Or this is like beyond that level?
The people who have Parkinson's have a lot of medication that they can take, a lot of different ones. One of the standard ways that they actually are able to see if you have Parkinson's disease is if they give you some of this medication, which is called, the brand name is Sinemet, the generic is carbidopa levodopa. It's often a yellow tablet. And if you take it and you respond to it, that's another sign that maybe you have Parkinson's disease, if you are showing symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And that's what allows you to actually move. But that's what I mentioned earlier with the dyskinesia, is when you get that hit of dopamine, it could be too much, it could be too little. It's never going to give you the exact right amount as you would have had it pre-diagnosis, pre-symptoms, right? So that old, which is hard for me to realize, is completely gone. That's not there for me anymore. So even on days when I'm moving well, I'm never moving as well as I did when I was 21 or 22. Or even like 38 or 37. The movement just isn't there. Yeah.
And I want to go back to how you feel, because you kind of, you know, there's all these impacts, and one of them being, you said for women especially, the lower levels of dopamine kind of leading to mental health. And I'm sure in any normal scenario, even if you're diagnosed with any other thing that could potentially harm the way that you move and you're dependent on people, can have that impact regardless of whether or not you have dopamine or not. And so, like, obviously when you were first, you know, you first heard it, you were like, okay, cool. But then kind of how has your process with it been?
I think I understood.
I'm sorry, did I say too much? I just mean,
No,
like,
you didn't.
how do you feel? How do you feel?
On a daily basis, it really depends. This week has been a really rough week because I am leading up to my menstrual cycle, my period. Hashtag taboo topic. But the reason that's important is because when women who are still menstruating, or even women who are in perimenopause or menopause, or even postmenopause, just women in general, we have hormones. I mean, men do too, but we have a lot more hormones. So when it's that time of the month for many women who are diagnosed young, like me, and we have a specific type of Parkinson's, it's called young onset Parkinson's disease, which tends to be different, although that's under debate. You know, there are debates in the medical community and the scientific community about that. But what happens is often women who have that diagnosis when they're still menstruating have a lot more side effects and an exacerbation of symptoms during the lead up time, the time, and the post time. So for example, for 2 weeks out of every month, I am not at my best. I'm either constantly sleeping, I'm fatigued, I'm tired. Everything about the medication, the side effects are worse. Everything about my symptoms are worse. I think there were days where I just didn't even get out of bed. Now, of course, I work full time, so I have to force myself to be able to do that. Yeah. So generally I feel okay, but I also feel okay because I have a group of women that I've surrounded myself with that are really strong and powerful, all who have Parkinson's disease. And I have really supportive friends, my old friends pre-Parkinson's, right? They don't have Parkinson's disease. And they've been really great. I know there have been a lot of people, a lot of women in particular, who've mentioned that they've lost a lot of friends because of their diagnosis. People just they just say things without sensitivity. They don't understand how to interact with the disease. They don't know how to interact with the person, which is really sad because I'm thinking they're still human. This is still the same person. So if this is your daughter, if this is your child, if this was your mom, how would you interact with that person? You know, and if you don't know how to interact, you can ask, you know, in a very polite and kind way that is possible.
Yeah.
So I'm very lucky that I'm just very lucky that I haven't lost any of my friends. So I'm lucky.
And I wanted to, Yashu, sorry, I know I'm asking too many questions. You can ask
No, you're totally fine. I think we're kind of thinking the same thing.
Yeah, like how can people in our community support you or be sensitive? And I mean, I don't know if there is like a South Asian angle to that because it is just human, but if there are things within our culture that, you know, seem to be exacerbated in the way that people talk to you, like how can we mitigate that? What are things that you see?
Well, that's really an interesting question on two levels. Number one, there's a lot of like backlash against the whole auntie thing. I know there's a lot of artists and people out there throughout the world who are Indian and South Asian who have written and done things about, oh, the auntie complex, or the aunties say these things. And I'm like, that's in every culture. That's just not an Indian auntie thing. That is in a Jewish culture. It's in Mexican culture. It's in human culture. And the opposite of that is you have aunties and people who are amazing. So why do we focus on that negative? And I'd have to say, look, if they're not saying anything to you, then you've got nothing to write about. So appreciate what they're saying to you, because you've got now material to use as an artist. So when my mom says something or an auntie says something to me, I'm like, great, keep saying it. I mean, I say that in jest, partly in jest. You know, like when someone comes and pats my belly, it's like, oh, you've gotten a little chubby. I'm like, yes, auntie, I've been eating too much of your food. Thank you. You know? But I've had nothing but good experiences with my aunties, like whether it's my blood relatives or people in the community. They've all been incredibly supportive. But for example, I had a very good friend of mine, and this is a very good friend of mine who's normally very sensitive. We were on a video call and she said, why does your head keep doing this thing? Like, what's wrong with you? And I just thought, wow, dude, you know I have Parkinson's disease. I've explained this to you. Interesting. I had someone else while I was on a video call with them, and this is also someone who cares about me a lot and is very dear. You know what I mean? Said, hey, you're just really making me dizzy. Can you just put the phone down somewhere? And I thought, you know, if I'm making you dizzy, just think about how this feels in my body. How I'm not able to rest. Everything is moving. Everything is jerking around. It is exhausting. So I'm sorry I'm making you dizzy. It's dizzy for me too. So I think we also have to take a step back and think about how you respond. And anybody could do that, right? Like if you think about what Jane Campion just said, for example, you know, that whole controversy that's going around. Good people I'm not saying that's her, but people say things all the time. And so I would have to say, think about what you're going to say before you say it. That's just common sense. That applies to everything. And if you don't know what to say, ask. How can I help? How can I learn more about this disease? What can I do to, I don't know, you know, just be considerate, be kind. Think about how you'd want someone to talk to your own child. You know, if this is your child or your niece or your nephew, would you want someone to talk like that to them? I mean,
I think that this is like a great platform to hear like even the things that have been happening to you, because then, you know, people know what kind of questions to definitely not ask and what kind of things to not say, but also to hear your perspective on what it feels like to be, to deal with that kind of thing.
Would say is that when people in the community, whether they're elders or friends, come and say, how are you? You know, which is true. Nobody really wants to know. But they don't say, how are you? They say, how is your health? And when I start to talk about it, and I'm not even talking 2 minutes, 30 seconds, their eyes just glaze over. And I'm like, wow, I haven't even used any fancy medical terminology. Okay. So just ask me, how are you? And just pat me on the head and go about your business. Please don't ask me how my health is. Don't ask how I'm doing if you don't want to know. You know, and I just learned to say I'm fine, even though I'm often not fine. Yeah.
And I think, you know, that we bring up a really important point. And I know how Sree was saying, it's like, it's not just a South Asian thing. It's like it's a everyone thing, right? But with that being said, I also do believe that the sensitivity awareness is not something that's really taught and I can only speak for the South Asian community because I'm from a South Asian community, that like, you know, my mom never said like, oh, well, when you speak to someone who has XYZ condition, like make sure that you're not saying this, you know, like I would always, you know, if I was ever, I think like the maximum I would get is, cause I remember I had like a kid I grew up with in my community who we would see at the temple. And my mom, she would just tell me, just don't look, don't make eye contact, don't look, don't stare. Yeah. Like this is the feedback I would get, you know, like I wouldn't say like, it's okay for you to go say hi, you know, or just be mindful of your word. Like we never got proactive dialogues, like, you know what I mean? So I feel like this is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's a real failing in the South Asian community. There's a lot of lack of education when it comes to sex, how to interact with women as men. That's a huge problem. How to interact with women when they're sick, how to interact with anybody that isn't hale, hearty, and whole, essentially, right? I mean, that's here in every
Mm-hmm.
community, but I think there are specifics in the South Asian community where there aren't as many resources or tools, and that
Mm-hmm.
language, that way of interacting, that education is only starting to happen. Not now. It's been a slow movement in the United States with South Asian communities. I have an old friend of mine who started an organization way back in the day called Chai, Counselors Helping Asian Indians. It's been renamed, but that was done way back in the day. But in India, there's now movements happening to educate people, but you really need to be able to talk to people about how to interact. I mean, true,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to stare at somebody in the sense that, oh, look, what's wrong with them? But you do want to look at them and acknowledge their presence as a human. And how to do
Mm-hmm.
that? It's the desire to stare at something that is not something that you're used to is very human. And instead of telling children, don't stare, just say, oh, look, explain what the issue is. But if you're a parent or an elder or a caretaker and you don't have that knowledge, how do you do that? You don't. So then the whole
Right.
way of
Mm-hmm.
interacting with people is perpetuated. So that education is very much needed. So,
Yeah.
we need South Asian therapists. We need South Asian
Right.
educators.
Yeah. I think there are like a few points that you made that are like super, super important so we can close out the conversation just because we're at that almost 1 hour limit. But one of the things
Has
you
it been
said,
an hour?
oh
Like
yeah,
I
I
was,
know. Sree, you are a great storyteller and also like a very, very like engaging person to talk to. So this has been like time flew. But
I feel like that was like
something,
10 minutes.
yeah, I know. So, just for anybody that's tapping in right now, some things that you should recognize when looking at, or thinking about disabilities and specifically Parkinson's. Sree said, like interact with the people as though they're human. Do not, if you have questions, definitely ask. And if you're a parent, you can do a little bit of research and educate your child. I think it's very simple. Yeah, and communication is key, Ami says. And I think yes, like this whole thing that you've done with us today is a great way of also just like amplifying like what it means to like be living with this. Because I would have never thought, okay, if there is shakiness in a camera, like probably wouldn't have said anything, but like I wouldn't have thought of how that's impacting you and how you're feeling. And
Hmm.
that's just something that just might not have crossed my mind because I don't know how you're feeling at any point in time. So thank you for sharing all that. I know that it was a lot of information.
Yeah.
Before no, but I'm very like I think Yashu and
I
I
might,
are
I
like
might have overwhelmed.
Not at all. I thought that was so
no.
informative and people need to hear this. That's the thing, right? Like it's look at me and I always tell Srishti this. I'm the one who really doesn't know anything on like I always tell her this. Like I always say like I don't really know anything when I get on here. And in every episode I'm learning something new. We should change this to what Yashu learned this week, you know? Like I always tell her like we need to change the name of this to like 2 things Yashu learned this week kind of thing. But coming back to just the topic and the seriousness of it's not even about Parkinson's, right? It's just about anything related to medical conditions or whatever it is. I think today the takeaways have really just been education, communication, like how to communicate about it. And then also like the experience. You are South Asian and you may share similar stories as someone else from a different culture, but things like tying a sari, things like, cutting your hair or like shaving your hair for XYZ reasons, which may or may not be related to Parkinson's. But, these things do impact the Asian culture, I think. And I think that you've just brought so much light
Oh,
Mhm.
thank you.
to those realities, if that makes sense.
It does. And the one thing I would say, just to summarize, is there's a lot of people, races, ethnicities, groups that feel unseen. And I'd have to say that people with disabilities are actually one of the most unseen and unheard of groups of people. And oftentimes we have an image of what someone disabled looks like, and it's often a wheelchair.
Mm.
And that is very valid as well. But, you know, when you start to find out that you have a disability, and for me, a disability could be a mental disability, it could be an alcohol addiction, it could be a drug addiction, it could be many different things. You start to look at the world hopefully a little differently and understand how disabled people in many ways are just not even visible anymore. People just kind of gloss right over you. If you're having a movement, nobody's helping you. If you're having an issue, if there's somebody even elderly, and to me, being old, as horrible as this sounds, and I was talking about some of this, being old is a disability in the sense that you no longer have the body that you did when you were 20. No matter how much people say 40 is the new 20, 40 is 40. You know, 40, 40, 50 is 50, 60. And when I was recently traveling with my parents in an airport, I was like, so who's there to help with the luggage? You know, my parents are in their 70s and we've got these big pieces of luggage. You have to take the luggage from the thing, put it in the other thing, lift it onto the shuttle, take it out of the shuttle, put it into the rental car, take it out of the rental car. These things are all strains on the body. The entire world is not made up to help people with disabilities or conditions. And we really need to look as a society as to how we can really make a change and acknowledge that, because at some point we're all going to have something, whether it's old age or whatever.
Absolutely.
Something is going to happen.
Yeah.
With that being said,
I just wanted to say one thing is that I definitely think like part of what we're trying to do with this series is talk about all the different types of disabilities. Yeah, educate on all of them, and not everything. We'll never get to everything, but just different types. Like you said, even like living with like depression can be, you know, a disability, or living with, there's so many different ways. And I definitely think, Sree, like I've met you, you know, and I would not say that it was super visible to me, and it was only because you were vocal about it that I had any idea that this was a thing. And I mean, honestly, it was a godsend that you did do that, because I had some idea of maybe, okay, like this is something that you're going through, and if I can be supportive, I'll try to be, or get you on this to talk about your narrative. But had you never mentioned it, I would have had no idea, because I don't think it's super obvious. So for everybody, it's not always obvious. I don't even think it was. Yeah, and it was definitely not with you. I want to end it with you at least plugging in a little bit about your Women Parkinson's project, because I know that's super important to you, and what people can do to support your organization and you, and any last thoughts you might have.
Sure. I mean, I mentioned earlier that I took a less stressful job because I wanted to focus all my 80 whatever hours on advocacy. And so any stress to me has to have a meaning, whether it's working within the South Asian community, working with people with disabilities, or especially working with women with Parkinson's disease. So two co-founders, my friends Kat Hill and Rochelle Flanagan, both who have Parkinson's, and I believe, they both have young onset Parkinson's. I should know this, but I'm a little tired. We started an organization in 2021 called Women's Parkinson's Project, and it's really based upon the tenet that women's voices need to be heard, women's voices need to be raised, women need to be represented. And there's a huge lack of representation in medical literature, medical trials for women in any disease in all shapes and forms. So what we want to do, what our goal is to really raise the voices of women, share their stories. There are other organizations that are doing wonderful things like Strong Her, which is an online Facebook Parkinson's group, Twitchy Woman, so many great resources out there. So we wanted to add ourselves as a complement to those other organizations by sharing women's stories in terms of audio, video, text, and visual, and particularly women from other countries where they don't have as easy access to representation. And by doing that, we really want to change the way women are treated with the disease and the way their accessibility to trials, to medical health care, all those sorts of things. So yeah.
That's amazing. And I think this is, again, so impactful. And for everyone who is tapping in, be sure to check out the comment pinned right here. We have tagged Women's Parkinson's Project there. And you can also follow Sree as well. But thank you so much. And is there anything that you would like to give as a final, closing statement? Anything that you want to tell people who may not have Parkinson's, maybe dealing with ADHD, maybe dealing with anything else, right? Depression, mental health, anything. Is there any takeaway you would like to give them?
I think the only takeaway that I found that works for me, and I'm really sometimes resistant against large, grandiose takeaways because, but I can speak on behalf of me. What helped for me was learning to speak up for myself and to get help when I needed, not to be afraid to see a physical, not a physical therapist, to see a psychotherapist or a, therapist, like marriage and family therapist, a counselor, to not be afraid to take medication if I needed it for depression. There's a lot of fear about not, about over medicating yourself. And I think if you've got the right team of doctors and you've got yourself as an advocate, being kind and considerate to your own body, that's what helped me to do that. And it was a battle. Like, I resisted taking medication for the first 3 years. I didn't need it as much, but when my doctor said, Sree, you have dopamine tattooed on your arm, maybe it's time to consider taking dopamine to help you move. I'm like, oh, good point, Dr. C. That makes sense. So my takeaway for me, what helped me, is listening to yourself, advocating for yourself, and not being afraid to get help when you need to get help. Yeah.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much, Sree.
Thank
For
you both.
everybody tapping in.
Great job. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm sure we'll continue to have more. Maybe Sree will join us in your currents at some point. We don't know. But here are things that we should remember. Communicate, be sensitive, and support in all the ways we possibly can. So with that, I want to say thank you so much, Sree, for joining us. Thank you, Yashu, for being an awesome co-host.
I do want to say, next time I come out to California, I would be so honored to be photographed by you, Sree. I don't know if you like to work with plus size Indian models, but if you do, I'm gonna just plug myself right in there.
Oh, I like to work with all models of all sizes, all ages, all colors. Absolutely.
I know she made me look good, so I know she'll do a good job. So with that, that has been Sree talking to us about living with Parkinson's. You can follow her work at Women Parkinson's Project and tune in next week for something different. Bye, everybody.